Welcome to the LDA Podcast, a series by the Learning Disabilities Association of America. Our podcast is dedicated to exploring topics of interest to educators, individuals with learning disabilities, parents, and professionals to work towards our goal of creating a more equitable world. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the LDA Podcast. I'm here today with Dr. Rachel Rubin, the CEO of Spark Admissions, a college admissions consulting firm. Dr. Rubin is also an internationally recognized college admissions expert, and we will be talking today about the college admissions process for students with LD and ADHD. So, Rachel, thank you so much for being here.
Certainly. Thank you so much for having me. I have always been interested in college admissions, even from my own high school experience and looking at colleges initially as a high schooler. After college, I was a special education high school English teacher in Oakland, California, and I helped my students who weren't necessarily on a college track really begin to think about possibly attending college at a variety of levels. And my students had also a number of different learning differences, anywhere from autism spectrum disorder to ADHD, dyslexia, etc. So that was kind of my first time really thinking about how eventually I wanted to shape the college admissions process for LD students. But after I completed my teaching in California, I went to Harvard for my master's and then my doctorate. And I focused my time at Harvard on college admissions, financial aid practices, student learning in college, etc. I did a lot of consulting at that time with colleges and universities, as well as with private families who were interested in seeking support on the college admissions process. So in 2013, I decided to start Spark Admissions.
That's great. And could you tell us a little bit more about what a college admissions consultant does? What's sort of your day-to-day? How do you work with families?
Great. It's a wonderful question. So, college admissions consultants in general are professionals with a deep understanding of the contemporary admissions landscape who help families navigate the ins and outs of preparing for and applying to college. There are different models for how consultants work with families, but at Spark, the goal is really to alleviate stress, offer clear guidance, and help students and their parents put their absolute best foot forward in application materials. There is also a lot of stress for students and families in general around the college admissions process, but I think it's really heightened for families with an LD student because there are so many additional questions, and colleges can sometimes be somewhat opaque, not just around the admissions process, but also around what student support services and LD services they offer. So our work sort of extends beyond just finding the perfect fit for the student in terms of college environment, but also ensuring that they have the services they need to thrive once they get there. And then, of course, supporting them throughout high school so that they are the most successful applicants possible.
Absolutely. I want to talk a little bit more about that. How can high school students begin to prepare for the college admissions process?
So I would say at Spark, we work with students actually as early as eighth grade and as late as the summer before their senior year. So it's really never too early or too late to start the process. Across the country, the majority of students begin the college admissions process junior year and the summer before senior year. However, we've found that working with students who are a bit younger is far more effective. We're able to really help guide them in a much more strategic and stress-free way. And so those who start earlier often have a big advantage in that they get more time to explore their interests through clubs, summer programs, independent reading, etc., and decide what it is they're really actually passionate about. Then once a student decides on a general field of interest, let's say biology, for example, then the goal becomes to delve into that field both deeply and broadly. So our students might take a 4 credit biology class at a local university, We'll help them attain a research internship in a biology lab. They can conduct an independent experiment on plant cells, for example, volunteer at an animal shelter, watch TED Talks about biological topics, compete in Envirothon and Science Bowl teams, or start those teams if your school doesn't have them yet. So the goal is really to develop an academic narrative of sorts, one that admissions officers will be able to easily follow. And then, of course, we really help students focus on maintaining strong grades, taking rigorous courses, and earning the best possible test scores. Now, this can look very different for each student, and it should look different. Um, and ideally, it's kind of aligned not only with their interests, but also with any challenges or supports that they might need. And we've had many, many students with significant learning differences be equally successful to students who don't and get into top schools or get into schools that are just a really incredible fit for them.
It's great. Well, and to talk more about the grades and the maybe test score part, things like the SATs or the ACTs, a lot of students with LD or ADHD really kind of struggle with test taking, or they can have test taking anxiety. What would you say, how important would you say that those numbers are when getting into college admissions?
Absolutely. So the winds of college admissions are shifting once more. And it really looks like the pandemic-driven test optional policies might start to fade into distance. Many top-ranked schools have restored their testing requirements. And actually, faculty at the University of California are pushing to end the system's test blind policies because of how many students they're seeing in remedial math. And so they feel like they actually really want and need SAT or ACT scores, particularly in science and math, to be able to ascertain kind of where the students should be placed once they get to college. Um, all of which is to say, standardized test scores are returning to a place of prominence in the admissions process after a few years in the wilderness. But they never will be and never really were the central facet of a student's admissions profile. They're just one piece of the puzzle. So, my advice is for students to look at a school's middle 50th percentile scores and ideally try to get to those as much as possible. Of course, it's ideal if they can get higher than the 50th percentile, but a lot of the time that's not necessary, particularly if the student is strong in a variety of other areas. Um, so it's almost never a deal breaker if a student is not successful on standardized tests, but a lot of schools are increasingly requiring them once again. With that said, some of the schools that are really best in the country, in my opinion, for students with learning differences, simply because they have very strong support services, um, still do not require test scores. And I actually don't think they will return to requiring them. A lot of liberal arts colleges that are a little bit smaller, that have amazing supports and offer classrooms with 10 or 20 students, those schools have so many other data points that they can use in an application or in an applicant's profile, that they really don't need to include test scores in order to be viable applicants. And even other schools like American University, Syracuse University, Northeastern University, University of Arizona, those are all schools with wonderful student support and learning support services that do not require test scores.
Hey, yeah, that's really interesting to keep in mind and the way that the trends are shifting back. So I'm really glad you got into that.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask too, as part of the admissions process, how should somebody decide whether or not to disclose their learning disability in their application?
That is a wonderful question, and it's a question we receive a lot. There's definitely not a single correct answer to this question. It truly varies from student to student. First and foremost, it's important to know that disclosures always optional. It is not required. Some students will choose to address their learning differences in essays or in the additional information section of the Common App because doing so provides useful context for maybe a below average grade or other circumstances. But many other students simply choose not to provide that information because they don't view it as relevant to their performance or their experiences more broadly. With that said, there are some learning disabilities that I generally think are really helpful to disclose because I think they help admissions officers understand that the applicant has grit and has worked particularly hard for their achievements. So, for example, almost all of our students with dyslexia disclose that. They're, again, never required to do so. But when a school sees, oh, the student was really successful in high school and they have dyslexia, they, for lack of a better word, almost give bonus points for that. Um, ADHD is something that students certainly can disclose, but the fact of the matter is so many students are diagnosed with ADHD at this point in time that colleges have a difficult time understanding how to interpret it. And so typically it's not necessarily helpful to disclose it, though it certainly won't hurt a student at all either. Colleges will not penalize a student for sharing a learning disability, and if anything, it helps admissions officers get a clearer picture of a student's academic background, experiences, and likelihood of thriving on their campus. But it is an individual decision, and we typically talk with each one of our students that has a learning disability about the pros and cons for the particular schools to which they are applying.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I'm shifting gears a little bit about when you're in college now and receiving accommodations. How does the framework of something like an IEP or a 504 plan that a student might have in high school, how does that change in college?
Great question. Those sorts of personalized plans are really limited to the K to 12 or the pre-K to 12 setting. That said, virtually all colleges and universities have disability services offices, um, or learning differences offices, support services, et cetera. They're called different things, but generally, a place like a disability services office will coordinate accommodations. And most students who qualify for accommodations in high school can access similar supports in college. Educational support may also include having peer tutors, academic coaching, structured study programs, and advising that's really tailored to students with specific learning needs. But such offerings vary extremely widely from one campus to another. So it's very important to do your research or to work with a college admissions consultancy that has a very clear understanding of these types of services. Um, because some students really need to receive their accommodations in order to be very successful in a collegiate environment. For students with LD, identifying colleges that align with their needs is critical, and they should really think about what accommodations they have that are absolutely essential for them in college. Then they should identify how much support would be available at each school, whether services are centralized through a disability service office or somewhere else within the university system, and how students can access the academic support once enrolled. There are some schools where that type of support actually is an additional fee, and other schools where it's just baked into initial tuition. So that's another important element for families to consider.
Absolutely. So glad you brought that up. All right, well, then I wanted to talk more about receiving accommodations in college, how that can vary from high school. Students in college really need to kind of hone their self-advocacy skills a lot more than they would have needed to in high school. Could you talk about how they can prep for that?
Absolutely. So, as you mentioned, colleges really expect students to take the lead, not parents, not professors, but the students themselves. Even in colleges with well-resourced accessibility offices, students are expected to demonstrate self-advocacy, clear documentation, and independence. Although colleges are able to provide the most common accommodations, those can really vary in terms of support, resources, and programs they offer. So it is, as I mentioned, up to families to navigate which schools will be the best fit for their child in advance of applying. With that said, there are a lot of things that students and families can do to prepare to be that type of proactive individual once the student is in college. Students should be extremely active participants in seeking accommodations while they're in high school. They should gain a really clear understanding of what accommodations are most helpful for them. Often in an IEP or a 504, there is a kind of a laundry list, a number of different accommodations, and some are actually probably critically important, others not so much. Um, an accommodation that's really common is that a student needs to sit at the front of the classroom in order to focus, to hear the teacher properly, to make sure that they're close to a whiteboard so that they can see any notes, etc. Well, in college, there's not really assigned seating, and so students just need to take it upon themselves to get there early and always have a seat at the front of the classroom. In contrast, one of the other things that I think is kind of what we see as most common and most helpful for students with LD is additional time on tests. And so students in college not only need to have that approved through the disabilities office, but then they need to talk directly to their professors about it. I typically recommend students meeting with their professors right after the first class to make the professor completely aware of the accommodations that will be provided for them and ensure that there is a structure in place even for that very first class. They know how they're going to get that extra time. Maybe they need to take it in a quiet room, etc. So being proactive from the very first day of this semester will really help a student be set up for success.
Absolutely. Well, is there anything that we didn't talk about that should be a consideration for a student with LD applying to college or in the college process? I know we talked about being very proactive. We talked about having to build those self-advocacy skills. Is there anything that we didn't touch on that you wanted to bring up?
Well, I think there's just a few other things. So all students could really benefit from starting early, both in terms of um, preparing for the admissions process, but also actually completing the application process. I would say that that's particularly important, however, for LD students, so that there's not an overwhelming amount to do at any one point in time. Right now it's mid-June, and this is a wonderful time to really start working in earnest on your college essays. At Spark Admissions, we try to help all of our students complete their applications and their college materials, essays, etc., the summer before senior year so that they don't have to worry about it in the fall. But I would say, again, it's especially important for our students with LD who are maybe already working so hard on their classes and activities during the school year and taken that extra time, going the extra mile to write incredible application essays is not something that they can necessarily do concurrently. So doing it over this summer, um, working on their essays and applications over the summer is very, very important. And as I mentioned, once students have a strong sense of their college list, speaking directly to disability services or other offices to make sure that their accommodations can be met is incredibly important. And then also having conversations around whether they should submit their test scores, whether they should disclose their learning difference, etc. Um, at Spark Admissions, we help students with all of that. We offer extremely hands-on, personalized guidance. And we have an entire kind of wing of our firm focuses on students with LD. Um, so we work one-on-one with students. Each one is assigned to a full-time admissions professional. But students also benefit from the collective wisdom of our team, which consists of former admissions officers, PhDs, and very experienced counselors and educators. So
That's great.
students really have the breadth of knowledge of many people who know essentially all about LD and schools that are very strong for them.
That's great. Well, before I let you go, Rachel, is there anything else that you wanted to share about Spark Admissions or to let people know how they can get in contact with you in Spark Admissions?
Absolutely. So if Spark sounds like a service that might be of interest to you, we offer free initial consultations to interested parties. And during that session, one of our counselors will get to know your family and your student, and your ambitions better. And will give you a clearer sense of how Spark might be able to help you achieve your goals. To sign up for an initial consultation, simply go to our website, which is sparkadmissions.com. And one of our talented admissions professionals will be very happy to schedule a consultation with you.
That's great. Well, Rachel, thank you so much for being here today and for sharing all this great knowledge about the college admissions process.
My pleasure. Thank you so much and have a great day.
Thank you for listening to the LDA podcast, which is made possible through the support of our members and donors. To make a donation or to get valuable resources and support, visit ldaamerica.org.